Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to the webinar series brought to you by the Centro Institute. My name is Ryan Manchi. I lead the Centro Institute, where we create educational programs and thought leadership initiatives to help you raise your game. We have a number of new folks joining us today, as well as our regular webinar listeners and attendees. And for some of the new folks who may not be as familiar with Centro and what we do, I'd like to tell you. I'll take a moment. So Centro provides software and services for digital advertisers. Our technology, it's designed to boost media, team, and business performance by enabling advertisers to plan, buy, and analyze advertising campaigns all on a centralized and collaborative system that we call Basis. We have an amazing team of media specialists and digital experts who provide our clients with raving fan service at every stage of any campaign. We're happy that you joined us today on our webinar, which is being recorded, and you will receive links to both the recording as well as the slides within the next 24 hours. We will have some time for questions at the end, so if you've already got some burning questions, you can go ahead and plug those in to the webinar panel in that questions tab, or throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those at the end. Our webinar is titled How to Capitalize on Cannabis Advertising, and I'm super excited to be joined by Paul Colento, who is co-founder and CMO over at Cannabis, which is the largest curated collection of compliant advertising for cannabis and CBD marketers, and one of a great partner of Centro's for Canna-approved inventory. A little bit of background on Paul. He's led teams and built digital media offerings across the advertising landscape, including online publishing with IDG, video advertising with Trivu, and social media with AdParlor. And now he's at Cannabis and Tryon and doing some amazing things. And I'll tell you, in my conversations with Paul leading up to this webinar, I've learned so much about the cannabis industry and just realized that this market may be even larger than I originally thought when we originally had this idea for the webinar. So Centro's prioritized cannabis for 2020, and I'm excited to have each of you learn even more. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul. Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan. As mentioned, I'm Paul Colento. I'm the co-founder and chief marketing officer for Cannabis. And as Ryan mentioned, we're the largest curated collection of compliant advertising for Canna and CBD marketers. And we can deliver campaigns either via managed service and programmatically working with Centro. But our mission at Cannabis is broad and ambitious, and it really is to help the Cannascape showcase how cannabis and CBD improve health, wellness, and happiness using what we've built as an end-to-end media, mainstream media model. Our tech platform is based on a merger from this past October with a company Ryan mentioned, Tryon Interactive, and that's a company with a 9-year history, and they're the leading mobile advertising platform that had historical roots in consumer packaged goods, retail, lottery, tourism, healthcare, and something very important for Canna campaigns, foot traffic and footfall campaigns. The capabilities to this platform include access to mainstream inventory to attract new customers into the ecosystem, and we focus on first click, getting someone to interact with a brand the first time in order to convert them. We have an in-house digital marketing platform, a dynamic build your own ad creative capability, as well as drive to location advertising services. The Cannabis team strongly believes that this Cannascape, where we are today, what we're talking about now, that it's going to operate like the market for consumer packaged goods over time, with the addition of compliance requirements similar to alcohol and pharma categories. Now in December, the reason we're here, we announced a strategic partnership with Centro to integrate Cannabis inventory and data products uniquely within the Basis platform. Now, why we're here, we have over 1,000 advertisers, marketers, and stakeholders that's registered to attend this event today on Cannabis advertising, either live or on demand. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why you're here today, because we are living in really an exciting time as a new wellness category is rapidly emerging and expanding. And we're seeing just crazy amounts of enthusiasm across the Cannascape, whether that be amazing business growth, new enterprise value, revenue, product innovation, and customer enthusiasm. Now, the Cannascape is a term that the team at CannaView and many in the market are using to describe the interconnected ecosystem of growers, producers, backbone providers, retailers, products, brands, and holding companies related to the cannabis and CBD markets. And yes, it's both complicated for the ecosystem and our customers. But notably, this Cannascape, we're not just a series of companies or products, but we are the equivalent. This is something that never happens. We are a movement. We are a movement that includes legislators, regulators, companies in the ecosystem, and customers. And this is important when we think about advertising today. We're not just delighting people through the products that we're selling and promoting. We are influencing culture, business, social justice, and many other areas. So let's get started. And on this slide, we're gonna talk about our goals. And my goal today is to provide some insights, not only to help with the mechanics, compliance issues, and KPIs behind cannabis segment advertising, but some ways of harnessing something we can't bottle. And that is an innate feeling or excitement that our prospects and customers experience through our products, brands, and services. And my goal is gonna help you get some actionable insights to improve your ad strategy and execution. So we'll be covering market opportunities and realities, the buyers, they're the foundation of our customer base, a largely still undifferentiated competitive landscape, the components needed to employ a successful ad program, as well as some creative suggestions and best practices. On the next slide, let's look closer at the state of the cannabis and CBD market. Advertising is ultimately about capturing systemic and organic growth for discrete strategic advantage. So let's look at this chart, this market itself, and you'll see we largely have the wind at our back right now. And in my lifetime, the closest thing to the growth of the Cannascape is probably the personal computer revolution of the 80s and the dot-com boom of the 90s. In just legal cannabis alone, there's a completely new hockey stick growth in the segment that, let's face it, didn't really exist just a decade ago. But there's a lot of challenges. And these are challenges that led our team to create CannaView in the first place. For the most part, we all can't run cannabis campaigns on platforms that we rely on for most other segments. That means no Google for the most part, no Facebook, no paid social. And as a result, that means folks that want to advertise in the upper funnel advertisers, they don't know where to get scale. The mid-funnel advertisers don't know where to run. And the lower funnel advertisers looking for demand yesterday, they're completely lost on what to do. And as a result, advertisers in this ecosystem have had to work historically with what are, quite frankly, second and third tier search networks, sometimes sketchy low rent inventory, and black box lead generation vendors. And at CannaView, through our partnership with Centro, what we're trying to do is change all that. Next slide, please. Now here's a staggering stat on the next slide. 50 cents of every planned or budgeted dollar for either cannabis or even CBD advertising is going to go unspent this year due to an inability to find ad inventory because of things like compliance, that publishers are not friendly to requiring it, technology or platform inhibitors, many different things. And since we are building out new audiences, new customers, and addressing what is essentially in our area mainstreaming of the cannabis category, the best way to find buyers, in our opinion, is to align with premium media environments that are already trusted by the prospect base. And that means that our advertising needs to occur in areas where prospects already trust the media, already trust the message through said media, and by extension, trusting the advertisers that align with said media and message. Next slide, please. Markets don't make themselves. They grow by connecting buyers and customers. And it's important for both cannabis and CBD brands to build a customer model to test whether or not that is indeed their customer, ingest and plan, and execute accordingly. CannaView currently classifies our supply around 3 categories: adult use cannabis, medical cannabis, and CBD. And participating publishers, they choose whether to either support a particular category or not, and it's set up through the Centro system accordingly. We also provide some processes for publisher review of segment ads, depending on the publisher. Key things to look at in developing a customer profile. Are your customers men or women? Are they young or old? Does this match who responds to the advertising? Because the customers you have and the customers that respond to advertising may not be the same. One other thing that we do in looking at the customer base and the customer profile is many times we work with brands to give their customers a name, create day in the life scenarios, try to understand how they use the internet, how they use their phone, how they use digital media, and how we can align with that with the right advertising message at the right time with the right price. It's important to think about selling the product from an advertising standpoint. Even though we're trying to sell product, that what we're not selling product, we're actually selling experiences to these new buyers and these new customers. And the best advertising is going to relate to the personal and professional passions of your customer. Next slide. Last May, we debuted our Cannascape. And before we look at it, I just want to give you a summary of it because it diagrams the relationship between various stakeholders in the cannabis and CBD ecosystem, from holding companies to the brands directly connecting with the customer. The Cannascape is going to identify notable growers, producers, distribution, supply management, payment solutions, compliance, dispensaries, hardware, delivery services. There's a whole bunch. And there's over 200 customers represented in this diagram, and that's growing from diagram to diagram. Now, the reason that we have this diagram and that we did it was we developed the Cannascape as an internal strategic planning tool at CannaView, but we decided to make this available more broadly to answer questions that we were getting from our publisher partners and media companies, our strategic partners like Centro, investors, advertisers like yourselves, and their agencies about the evolving cannabis ecosystem. And we use this information to better understand the interrelationship of the different categories together to build advertising packages that both attract premium publishers to participate in the platform and new customers to best take advantage of that platform. We also look at how we at CannaView can play a role potentially addressing systemic inhibitors to the segment, even by looking at how advertising can help with items like either counterfeiting or health concerns. Now, what you can see in this slide is it's complicated. There is a lot of stuff, a lot of brands, a lot of confusion, and there's a myriad of players in this ecosystem. And the players, they all operate in different states, different clusters of states. Some are in medical states, some are in recreational states, some are here, some are there. Some others are focusing on control, distribution, and production. Others are basically producing products and attempting to get them sold in various places with various different types of compliance requirements. Specific to these kind of areas, there's both a B2B ecosystem that relates to growers, producers, cannabis distributors, banking, etc., and a B2C ecosystem that looks at things that customers see, like e-commerce platforms, dispensaries, hardware delivery products that leverage cannabis, as well as the brands themselves. We also see that there's holding companies that own and execute in 3 or more categories across this as well. One thing that we often do when working with a brand at CannaView is highlight where they sit And then we draw lines between the brand and their ecosystem partner. What this does is it helps us highlight potential ways to build the best advertising and marketing program. And if you ever want to do that exercise with me, drop me a line at paul@canaview.net. We can do that. But here's what I see, and this is something here that I find very troubling, and it's something that every advertiser and marketer needs to pay attention here. I don't see, and there isn't yet, a segment gorilla emerging that basically is the Tesla of the cannabis ecosystem or the Apple of the cannabis ecosystem. There's a lot of players. And let's face it, at least in the United States, to our customers, to your customers, today, cannabis is the brand, not the companies themselves. Now, to many advertisers, and sometimes, by the way, myself included when we're building these programs, we're focused on the results that the advertising generates, the sales, and not building a brand with reach and frequency. The companies that build the brands that exist in as many state markets as possible is the ones that are going to win over time here. And we know that this is in every other segment. Demand advertising does not build brand, reach advertising, and brand advertising does. And that's something that isn't going on here significantly, somewhat inhibited by kind of the state-by-state nature of the area. In order to build one's brand, one thing I would encourage everybody here to do is some level of a brand equity exercise. We have a model that we use at CannaView we can share if you like. And what that does is it measures your product from the way a consumer sees you, a product analysis, and a company standpoint. And specific to product versus company, one thing on some of these brands is you may have products which are better known than your company itself. If you're looking to maximize return over time with advertising, focused on the area with the strongest focus. Next slide, please. Now, CBD is the largest category actually of short-term advertising in the broader cannabis segment. And here's a sneak peek at a CBD scape that CannaView is about to imminently launch and distribute. This will be sent to you along with your presentation materials within about 24 hours of the live event. And CannaView, we break down the CBD ecosystem across somewhat similar to the Cannascape, growers, producers, oil-based, but also the products themselves, drinks, edibles, tinctures, hardware, e-commerce, and traditional retail. Now, this is an area in particular that's really important to realize that CBD today to most customers is the brand. We have brands that we're looking to do, but there's very little brand preference going on. That is really, really dangerous, that there's no truly well-known brand or Coca-Cola in the segment, if you will, right now, because a no brand mindset creates a race to the bottom from a pricing standpoint. We at CannaView work with a variety of customers that are attempting to sell at a premium price point, meaning sometimes products as high as $150 for a CBD product. If the customer doesn't know who your brand is, what it means, and that they get a benefit outside the product themselves, it will be very difficult to sell at those premium price points, because brand equity needs to be known and it needs to be built in time. And in this context, being known by the customer before they see advertising is more important than having a better product, because without the awareness, being better doesn't matter and it won't convert to sales. Next slide, please. At CannaView, we have 5 components, pillars, if you will, related to components to program success and cannabis program success, especially as they relate to compliance. Let's take a look at them. These pillars of compliance success include the creative, the requirements themselves, technology, media, and integrations. And as a marketer, you can work with partners on some of these components and develop expertise in-house for others. At CannaView, we do all 5, but we work with customers in different ways. The first area of creative, compliance just doesn't mean like following the rules. It also means that it's compliant with the rules of general advertising. And what that means, there needs to be a compelling offer. There needs to be dynamic visuals. And most importantly, a well-tested and measured landing page that does something. Too often in this segment, we have launched campaigns previously with new advertisers that hadn't tested whether their commerce system is working and whether their floodlight tags are working properly and things of that nature. Having that in process will dramatically increase the ability for you to measure the effectiveness of advertising. The next area is compliance itself, and that means compliance with local, state, federal, and also compliance means following the rules that the publishers have. And one thing that's very interesting is there's this idea that the strongest standards come from government, and in many cases that can be the case, but increasingly the standards for what's allowed on a premium publisher's site is far more stringent as it relates to creative messaging, targeting, compliance, and use of data. The next area is technology, and technology at minimum needs to focus on an ability to deliver, to measure, and to optimize advertising by, at least the basics: clicks, conversions, and overall ROI. And this is an area where all of those tools and more are built into our partner's central platform and basis. Media, too, is another area that's interesting because it's often an afterthought. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the requirements of LDA compliance and state-by-state targeting and things of that nature. But think of the Super Bowl. Advertisers buy time on the Super Bowl at an event and a place, and they pay by audience. And in this area, as it relates to digital media, there is often a predisposition to buy whatever media you can at the lowest cost. Here's the problem with that. Not only does that mean that you may or may not be reaching real people in real sites and real good environments, but if a customer doesn't know you, they've never heard of you, and they see an offer from you, they're not going to trust you. And that trust isn't built on seeing an ad on an endemic site, because the other thing is the new customers coming into the cannabis market or even coming into CBD are not the converted. There are relatives, there are parents, there are friends, and these folks are not looking on those sites, they're looking in the places they trust. And then the last important area that's really important is that we need to integrate as allowable and as privacy aware as we can be with data and other partners and other platforms. Centro, as an example, has capabilities to work with customers of multiple sizes. And for CannaView, this gives us as a company access to a larger customer success team than we have on our own. And we view Centro as one of our greatest integrations and most important integrations. Now, on the next slide, advertisers who figure out this both reach and compliance have a strategic advantage today. And these are areas that CannaView's integrated inventory into the Centro platform is particularly critical, because we're answering questions like, is cannabis advertising allowed on the sites I want to run on? Where are they running? Is the advertising age gated? Is it LDA or legal drinking age compliant? Is it meeting the requirements that my state or local jurisdiction has? Is there enough scale? Are there opportunities to break the mold with high impact sites, takeovers, apps, and ad units? One area that Centro is very unique as a buying platform, sometimes called a demand side platform or DSP, is the fact that they do support and embrace compliant cannabis and CBD advertising. That is not true of every player, and virtually nobody has a direct integration with supply the way that Centro does through the CannaView partnership. And the other thing that's important to look at is the vendors and marketers to understand what you can do and what you can't do have a particular strategic advantage. Next slide. Before we look at the creative, let's just, too often creative itself is overlooked. This sounds really odd to say, but advertising needs to have an offer. You need often, whether if a discount, for instance, is allowed by law, use it. If it's, make sure there's compelling visuals. Make sure also that there's a landing page that works. Now, this seems simple, but the basics, the very basics of advertising are the #1 inhibitors to cannabis and CBD campaigns, and that is that the creative has not been tested to work before it's attempted to be run. It's great to focus on targeting, audience segmentation, and the places that you run and hold your partners accountable, but ultimately, people engage and buy products based on you. And you're maximizing ROI through your choices in the platform, but ultimately the offers are important. At CannaView, we build some unique to segment ad units that leverage existing creative assets. And depending on category and state requirements, we use a variety of ad units to focus on building things like some KPIs like newsletter registrations, because one of the best ways to generate sales for your customer is sending them offers with frequency. Helping them with visits to retail, like ad units that basically give them directions to go to their local dispensary or delivery location, as well as other intended advertising results. And we provide these capabilities to Centro customers merely by you working with Centro. It's there, feel free to take advantage of it. On slide 18, Canna advertising, or the next slide, in general, there's really 4 things that come to play as they relate to advertising and creative compliance. And now some of this is going to be, related to jurisdiction, law, registration. Some of it is going to be related to the fact that many publishers have very strict guidelines on what they're going to allow on their sites, particularly premium publishers. The first important thing that's really important, and this is something built into Centro's basis platform, is that campaigns, particularly cannabis campaigns, need to be super location aware and micro-targeted. And based on that Schedule 1 status of cannabis, CannaView ad programs, we need to leverage location-specific information to make sure that no program we run in a either adult use or medical area runs across state lines. It has to exist. It has to be only within the state within which it operates. And even if the states they touch are legal cannabis states, campaigns can't do that because of the federal restriction. Campaigns need to be set up state by state, even sometimes region by region. And that's an area where the basis platform allows the capabilities to get very detailed, very granular, very specific. This is very important. Now, a lot of people call Farm Bill enabled CBD 50 state legal. I wouldn't really describe it that way, but cannabis CBD campaigns can run a little bit more broadly than cannabis. But we avoid at CannaView personally states like Arizona, Idaho, Nebraska, and Virginia due to some legal ambiguities in those states. They're not large states as they relate to volume, so therefore we can focus on other areas, and it kind of also allows us to help some of our customers be more compliant aware. We view all targeting has to be in compliance with relevant state, regional, and local rules and regulations. And again, as I mentioned before, many of our premium mainstream publishers require more detailed restrictions. And we're going to expect, as a national acceptance happens over time, while there may be more publishers open to taking cannabis segment advertising, I would expect publisher requirements to actually grow more restrictive than law, even as legalization goes over time. And we've seen this as it relates to alcohol and pharma categories beforehand. Another area that's important is the age of prospect. Advertising needs to occur on sites and apps that are LDA compliant, and some states even require further qualification. So that generally means sites where the predominance of users are 21 plus, and we look at 18 plus for CBD, except in states that want us to be more specific and more granular. Age gating versus LDA placements, meaning where we're getting people that are known 21 plus through first party user registration on sites, are also preferred, and we conduct those programs as available. One thing that's very important to us and should be very important to the industry is that we are not targeting kids in any shape, way, or form. And we've seen this hurt other segments before, whether that been non-cannabis vaping, whether we've seen that with smoking, whether we've seen that with alcohol. We know that this can be a problem. We need to avoid it. Another area of compliance that's on the slide here is creative message. Now, we define the Cannascape by adult use, commonly called recreational, medical cannabis, and CBD. Now, across all three of these categories, advertisers should avoid people in the ads. Not only do many states have restrictions on this, but many publishers do. And there usually are exceptions if you have a celebrity or athlete endorser, particularly in CBD on a case-by-case basis. Virtually nobody can run with anything with smoke or consumption of any type. And given the fact that many ads used programmatically are also scanned, words like weed, cannabis, and marijuana not only are not allowed by publishers, but can get you blocked by the publisher platforms that you're using when you use those ads in your ads. It's also important that no health claims of any kind are made. And that relates to even things like pain relief, hangover cure, etc. We do not allow cartoons, images, or style that in any way you might think would relate to marketing to people under the age of 21, as well as other items restricted to publishers. On a state-by-state basis, we also maintain a database of, I think, 150 different attributes of different kinds of restrictions, typically as they relate to where you can basically advertise and where you can't, based on proximity to schools, public buildings, etc. Next slide. What we're trying to do in the next slide here is provide mainstream sites for mainstream buyers to help you be able to work with publishers and attract new customers in new ways. And this is particularly effective in getting someone into a dispensary or using a adult use cannabis product that never had done so before, someone that is going to connect with a doctor to get a medical cannabis card, or someone that is going to leverage or utilize pain cream of some kind or some type of CBD product. The key way that we believe to connect with people is to do so in mainstream environments, just like other mainstream categories. And here's a snapshot of some of the sites that we provide access to, but we have programs that we can customize by segment, by intent, by product. And behind this are literally hundreds of premium partnerships that allow for some types of adult use cannabis or medical cannabis or CBD advertising. Now, when customers come to work with us, as we wrap up, they're not just advertising for the first time. Many people have tried this before. We're basically helping solve some problems. And there's three common attributes that really almost all the customers that we have encountered for before. The first one was reach. They had a planned spend. They wanted to spend their ads. They had a reach goal. And for a variety of the players, publishers, or platforms they were using, they weren't able to hit those goals. That means they weren't even able to get the eyeballs they wanted, even before we're talking about, going to your landing page. Those that solve that problem, the next challenge is response, and that is basically working with real people, not bots, that go to your site and interact with it for the first time. One of the biggest challenges across this area is that click-through rates for cannabis and CBD advertisements realistically are lower than the standard click rates that you are going to get for other advertising areas. So that could be, and that is, around 0.3% CTR. We have some ways with the custom ad units to get that closer to 1% on those areas. But in general, the one thing that we do know in these areas, because it's new, is that CTR is a little bit depressed. That said, though, we often, are helping people that tried to get clicks and visits to their site and got massive amounts of bounces. And the third area that we're helping people with is conversions, because we need to, the one interesting thing is you need to get someone to your site the first time and then communicate through retargeting and other mechanisms with that person over time, because first click environments are really important because people don't buy from brands they don't know. And they need to find environments that lead to purchase, whether online or in store, depending on product, regulation, or objective. Next slide, please. The important thing to know here is that Centro, through the partnership that we have with CannaView, has the ability to deliver programs that achieve scale, get the response you need, and the conversions that really you are measuring the programs. And more importantly, we can help you evaluate the likelihood of success of your creative before it even runs, because we know the adage, for every bad ad, there is someone who approved it, and we want to make sure that we're not those people. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ryan.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great, Paul. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone. We've got a slew of questions to get through, so I'm highly confident we're not going to be able to get through them all. But let's see if we can go for a record for number of questions answered on the webinar. The first one, I love this the idea of what role should audience data play in a cannabis or a CBD campaign?
So data is an area, an aspect of our partnership with Centro that we have some areas on, and certainly there are companies today that are focusing heavily on building data pools of audiences. I think the one thing that we got to be careful of, and this is a challenge with data-centric marketing, is only a small fraction of Canna customers are actually Canna customers today. And so the key thing in looking at data is building out lookalike models so that we can look at who are customers today, find out what their personal, professional passions are, and look along that. Could that be something like, for instance, in the world of pet CBD, that might be people that recently took their pet to a vet. In the area of cannabis or CBD products, it could be around pain, and attributes might be people that do yoga or play basketball or things of that nature. And so I think that the data modeling can be helpful, but you've got to be careful to not do a data-centric or data-only model here, because quite frankly, none of us are doing enough business at enough scale that we truly know who that buyer is. And we really do need to just spread a contextually relevant net in order to develop that model. And more importantly, brands themselves should develop their own first-party data model as opposed to looking at third-party models over time, because not only is that the direction the market is requiring in 2 years, that's really the area that will provide unique differentiation from your brand that their competitors won't have.
Great, that's great. I think some good points there. We've got several questions. Let's see if I can roll it all into one, around some of the compliance, the kind of creative best practices about certain words to be able to be included, and also the imagery. So I know you called out a few things specifically there, but I think some questions around some other areas as well. Like, could you use the word bud? Could you say sativa, or oil or concentrate? Can you have the actual like cannabis plant in an ad, but not a person? Any additional clarity there of both, I think, best practices and also what those lowest common denominators are?
So one of the best ways to address what your product is about is actually in your company logo and your product name. So one area to look at is how does your brand itself reflect what it is about? Okay, so that's one area to kind of address some of the challenges. And and every state, different states have different requirements as it relates to what you can say around promoting benefits like the word high, or find your buzz, or things of that nature. I think you want to kind of avoid those over time, in particular, even if they were allowed in the state, because they really don't work well. And I know it requires a little bit more heavy lifting in building the creative as you go. But here's the thing. We talk a lot about in America, for instance, around like regulations for the environment as it relates to manufacturing jobs. Well, the state that actually has the most manufacturing jobs in America is actually California, the most regulated environmental state in the United States. Similarly, we need to use the compliance guidelines, and I think each brand should kind of develop their own. They kind of exceed state, local, and federal law and publishers, and figure that out on their own, because by going through that exercise, taking a disciplined approach to say, how do I run my message better? How do I run my thing better? It would go from there. Now, the big problem too is sometimes, and the CBD guys are having this, is in order to be FDA compliant, they're making very generic stories and very generic messages to the point where it's making a lot of their advertising ineffective. And so I think the one key area here we got to look at when we're doing this is just, does this ad make sense? And does my, and would somebody know what I'm selling if they're selling it? One area to get away, sometimes, whether or not bud or flower or things like that can be shown in an ad, and whether or not it's allowable by state, and whether or not a publisher can kind of take it. Literally, brand is more effective in many cases, and most importantly, if available and possible, offer in conjunction with brand is also super important.
Yeah, it's great. One real quick follow up on including certain words. What if the brand name itself has the word weed or THC or cannabis?
You often get a get out of jail free card for that. So
gotcha. Oh, that's nice. I was going to say they got to change their name, right?
And like, I don't want to really name any brands specifically for the purposes of this call, but there are several that run fairly large campaigns that have some prohibited words in their name and in their logo, but they're able to do that and run that because that's their identity and that's their brand. And the one thing we got to look at, though, is in states where that could be restrictive, many of them create kind of an alternative logo that kind of uses letters as opposed to the full name in order to kind of deal with that restriction or that requirement.
That makes sense. So a few questions and comments about the Canescape, which I love. Such a cool thing that Cannavu has created and that you've worked on and continue to add to in iterations there. How do people go about, or I guess one, how do you go about selecting who's included? And then what if there's somebody out there feeling like they should be added to the list? How do they go about getting their logo on one of those Canescapes or the CBD scape?
I think the best way to do that is to connect with me. I'm Paul Colento at Cannavu, at paul@cannavu.net. That's CANNAVU.net. And for the most part, if it is a brand that has an important footprint, meaning, typically that means in multiple retail environments, sometimes in multiple states or not. We will put one of the challenges we're going to have, particularly in the CBD scape, is you'll see that's a little bit more sparse than the CannaView one. If we put everybody in there in every segment that they operated in, the document would be maybe 50 times larger than it is. And so figuring out what that is. The other thing is, if you don't like the category you're in, let's have a dialogue about that, and let's figure out, if you're in the right place and so forth. Over the next few months, when we release new Cannascape, I'm also going to be doing a series with CannaView of social media posts, particularly through Twitter and some other areas, to also try to engage the vendors, more importantly, about where they sit. Because I also think not only do we want everybody to be on it that's in the ecosystem, I think we also need to discuss with everybody how they're working with distributors, with location providers, with retailers, etc., so that we can all work together to really harness customer enthusiasm, build more programs, and scale this industry the way it's supposed to.
Gotcha. That's great. That's great. And we've gotten a few questions. I'll reiterate again. The copy of the presentation as well as a recording, those will be sent out within the next 24 hours, probably by end of day today. So you can be on the lookout for that. And my guess is we're going to have to follow up with a few folks individually to answer some of the questions that we didn't get to. Here's a question. We've got 5 different people asked about this when it comes to revenue and banking across state lines, where maybe you're essentially where people are established, where you're running campaigns, getting that money, the transactional side. Can you kind of speak to that? How Paul, how you've seen that at CannaView, how you guys have addressed that, and also kind of what the growing trend is to be able to address that, making sure everybody gets paid and it's still compliant both on a state and a federal level.
I'm not so when we're running ad campaigns for, let's say, a canna brand, let's say it was a medical dispensary in a particular area in a particular state, we're only going to run and market that within a certain radius of that particular location using a variety of premium media, and particularly sites that we have that have ideally some type of local market focus. Okay, and so that's how we handle that. Now, if it's about where you can transact in what states, we typically are only working with advertisers that are licensed in the particular states with which they are licensed to produce, distribute, and operate against, particularly in on the cannabis side. On the CBD side today, while we hear a lot about a push to retail, most of the CBD guys are basically setting up e-commerce shops, working with some type of third-party payment provider, and running direct-to-consumer DTC e-commerce operations. And quite frankly, in those cases, it's very difficult to build scale against.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I know, in looking at the Cannascape and, some conversations that we've had, Paul, maybe talk about, like, when you look in your crystal ball, where do you see some of the biggest growth areas that you've maybe seen in the last couple months as we're already kind of well into 2020, and where do you expect kind of the biggest growth this year, and then maybe even into next year?
There's a variety of trends kind of like going on today, okay? And so, the one area here is a lot of companies in the Cannascape are undercapitalized. And so the one area and trend that I see is while we hear a lot about venture being constrained in this area, what we actually see is a consolidation of funding across different kinds of what are perceived to be better companies, okay? And so one thing I do see happening in the segment from just a number of vendors standpoint is continued consolidation in that area. And I think that over time, maybe not in the next year, But a lot of the multi-site operators, which are called holding companies for the most part in the Cannascape, they operate dispensaries and products under a variety of different brand names and things of that nature. And I think that as national acceptance and legalization and eventually interstate agreements happen with each other, I think that we're going to see more common brands operate in those areas. The area to me that I think is really like one of the more impressive aspects of the Cannascape is the delivery service area. You know, the folks that basically are helping folks either pre-select products so they can pick up at the dispensary, or we're allowed by state, and in the states where it's allowed, actually physically deliver that, essentially providing Uber Eats style cannabis areas. That's really important. And I think we're going to see a lot of interesting partnerships between delivery services, cannabis companies, and mainstream brands that are not in the canna category in the next 12 to 18 months. And I think that's an area to watch. And that's also important because it gets the audience for who might be a customer significantly larger than the folks that are today's customers. I think that when you see like a state legalized, like Illinois, we see massive amounts. I think it was like $11 million in the first month or more, massive amounts of revenue. And we're going to start to see that plateau, just like legalized gambling does whenever a state legalizes it, until you bring in new products, new areas, new customers, et cetera. And really, the companies that bring the non-canna future cannabis customer into their brand is the ones that are going to win.
That's great. That's great. A few questions. I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a theme, or trying to make a theme of different companies, like some tips or some best practices. The first for publishers that are maybe in the space that are maybe have not historically accepted any sort of cannabis or CBD ads in the past, but looking to offer that up. Any quick tip or two on what they could potentially what they should look at, and how they can maintain compliance, but also be able to sell some of that inventory to these various companies.
For publishers, there is a perceived business risk associated with looking at that segment, and that's not just on the cannabis side. Many view that also on the CBD side as well. And so, one area that absolutely has to happen in working with it for any publisher's decision is to go through some type of legal review process to, look at their risk and whether or not they want to take on that risk based on, a variety of different areas. That's often the publisher's decision to look at one or more segments of the Cannabiscape and allow that advertising really usually comes down to whether or not they think that their audiences are going to be receptive, relevant, and interested in this particular topic area. And what's really interesting is that the publishers that have done the heavy lifting are often storied brands with like 100-year histories that have done a lot of user research, saw that there's high interest in CBD and cannabis products, and embrace it because that's where their audience base is kind of, looking at areas they're looking to kind of embrace it. I think the one area that everybody should be very careful of, though, is making sure that even if your site is LDA compliant or not, let's make sure that your site, your topic, your context is age appropriate. I know as myself, as a parent of a teen, and knowing that this is inevitable, I think that there will be some particular backlash against cannabis advertising at some point once national acceptance and further legalization happens, because it's happened in every other segment. It's going to happen here. So the thing that we need to do, and what publishers need to do, and the industry needs to do, is be super vigilant on the messaging and the targeting and so forth, and often sometimes do it outside and even more extensive than what's required by minimum regulation. And the other area here, and this I think is going to work with publishers very well as first-party publisher data becomes more important, given that cookies are being phased out over the next 2 years. as an industry, we need to build reasonable and real privacy guidelines likely ahead of most state regulations. And, as it relates to cannabis, some states like Maine, for instance, are already super restrictive. Others have few. But I think that as an industry, we need to maintain and we need to respect the privacy of our customers, and we will be rewarded with growth.
It's great. And like a little bit of a continuation of that, there's a couple questions, it looks like, from some different agencies that we work with that are maybe charged with working with some of the state health departments, the medical agencies, with advertising more from a compliance and even in some cases prevention. Any tips for them, or is that an area that you play in, that you've seen, or it's more kind of the other end of the spectrum, the folks that are really looking to advertise their products and services?
I think that the one area that, from a health and safety standpoint, that's a really important area. And I think it can be looked at, and we've helped customers from a variety of angles in this area. But as an industry, the one thing that I don't see yet, from a lobby standpoint, is the industry coming together and saying, this is how we're addressing counterfeiting. This is how we're addressing the vape crisis. This is how we're addressing youth protection and things of that nature. And so, and now first off, when you're running that style of advertising, you have many more places to run youth protection advertising, for instance, or public safety advertising. It doesn't have to be on a site about cannabis. Many more will embrace that and take that level of advertising. So I think it's just a matter of looking at it as it relates to state regulatory agencies and so forth. It should be noted in some states like Nevada, for instance, in order to run a digital ad, you have to actually run that. You have to actually submit the ad to a regulatory body for review. That I think is supposed to take 10 days, but could take longer depending on them being backed up or the fact that they're kind of new at the regulatory process. And so clearly understanding if that's required is really important to determining, who to contact and when.
What about the B2B space? You talked a little bit, I think primarily from like a consumer perspective, which I think is probably where there's the biggest kind of market for. But as the industry is growing, as it's maturing, looking at addressable audience of growers, of the CBD manufacturers, of even the security and the transportation, the kind of financial side of it. Thoughts there where you guys have had seen some success?
So the B2B side is the area that's of a lot of interest to us. Mainly that my founder, Miles Dennis, and myself, the two co-founders of the Cannabis side of our brand, came from a B2B background. We worked in B2B. I was a B2B publisher in the tech industry in the late 90s. I mean, this is an area that and the first area to look at, that we look at there, is looking at the candlestick diagram and drawing some lines between the various players in the ecosystem. To your point, helping people with distribution, helping a brand decide who they can talk to about formulating and what products and what kind of sourcing materials to use and so forth. This is really a challenge for a lot of the industry. And so we're looking at ways of kind of doing that. And I think that outside of like pure play standard advertising, at Cannaview, we're looking at potentially creating some unique products that kind of engage the ecosystem with each other as a way to kind of, build that interrelationship. One of the big challenges in the Cannascape, and this is actually even worse than the CBD, is that there is a real product consistency and quality problem as it relates to, what kind of quality of product or biomass, et cetera, exists. And that's an area that we're looking at how we solve those kind of problems, because there's been a lot of companies burned by sourcing or working with the wrong partners. As it relates to distribution, one of the challenges is that a multi-site operator that is going to basically often be growing in the state, producing in the state, building its own products within a state, and selling them within its own dispensary. While there might be products that are licensed to be sold from third parties in that state, you're inevitably going to make a lower margin on those kinds of products. So getting in those areas, getting distribution is going to be a challenge. On the other side, when we look at the independent kind of cannabis retailers, the ones that are getting licenses through the state areas and grants and et cetera, is many of those people have never run a business like this before. They don't know what the signage looks like. They don't know what wholesalers and distributors to work with, and so forth. And so I think almost like a confidence marker or something needs to be developed in the area, because when you hear about like products that are not fully compliant, it often happens with through a newer or younger entrepreneur who is trying to be compliant but might be working with the wrong partners, and they didn't know ahead of time.
Makes sense. Well, we are at our time. We're actually a minute over. We had great questions. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This does conclude our presentation. When you log out, you will receive a survey, and I sincerely appreciate you guys giving us feedback on not just the presentation today, but additional topics. This was the first time that we've really focused in on a specific industry, on a vertical. It way surpassed the interest that we thought it would. So if there's other areas that you're interested in to dig in more, if there's additional follow-up areas related to the cannabis and the CBD market, we'd love to get that feedback, and we will do our best to follow up and see where we can provide some answers. As I mentioned, the slides that were presented, as well as the recording of this webinar, will be sent to you via email. Until then, thank you all. I'm Ryan Manchi. This has been the webinar series brought to you by Central Institute, and we're glad that you joined us. Thank you so much. Have a good day.